Hello everyone, I'm Pratik and today we'll be discussing the news today of 26th August. So before we start, here are the quick headlines. First, surge in female workforce participation. Second, tribal ministry seeks separate census for PVTGs. Third, Trump's Intel deal and reinvention of state capitalism. Fourth, Gram Sabha holds authority to prepare CFR management plans. Fifth, commercial prohibited speeches not part of fundamental rights as per Supreme Court recent judgment. And in places in news we have Fiji Island. And again we also have quick updates as well. So starting off with a very positive news, there's a surge in female workforce participation. And this news essentially is part of GS1 Indian society as part of the salient features of Indian society, women and issues related to women, and GS paper 2 social justice as part of the schemes applicable to the vulnerable section, and also with respect to GS paper 3 in terms of inclusive growth. So let me just tell you the crux of this news. The crux is that as per the recent periodic labor force survey, what they have explained or what they have suggested is that there has been a huge increase in terms of participation of women's labor force participation in terms of from 22% in 2017 to around 40%. So basically there is increase in, or there has been doubling of women's participation in workforce, which is again a very positive news. Secondly, and again a corollary of this is that the women's unemployment rate has also decreased from about 5% to around 3%. Not only this, this development comes in the backdrop of the fact that majority of the employment opportunities have been seen in the rural areas. And the other aspect is that not only women are seen as job seekers, but they're also being projected or they're also participating as job creators as well in terms of entrepreneurship. Now, these facts basically indicate a very huge change in the socio-economic dynamics of the country. And part of the reasons for this particular development could be first, change in the mindset. So there's a change in mindset about the capability and capacity of women. And this is essentially further strengthened by the government initiatives in various areas, including education. So with respect to education, we have Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao initiative. And then there's also initiative to push for the employment of women. For example, we have initiative like Maternity Benefit Amendment Act of 2017. And then there are other initiatives to enhance the women's participation through various initiatives, including the entrepreneurship initiative like the Startup India, Stand Up India, right? So again, the emphasis of government, there is a strong impetus of government. Along with that, there's a strong push by globalization as well, which has led to creation of gig economy, and it has also opened the avenue for digital platforms where women can be, or women are using as a platform for employment. So these are some of the drivers for surge in female labor force participation. These are the drivers, and this is definitely a positive impact. When it comes to some of the negative aspect, most of the jobs that are created, as per some of the critics, they are created in informal sector. And when they are created in informal sector, they do not provide well-paying jobs that has social security such as pension, right? So they do not have social security. Also, if we benchmark the performance of other countries with that of India, we still have a long way to go. In fact, the labor force participation rate in India is around 40% roughly, and in the other countries, it is around 50%. So we need to fill this gap as well. So again, this is definitely a positive news, but we need to take this with a pinch of salt. So if you look at the details, The PLFS data talks about the female workforce participation rate, which has increased from 22% to 40%. And this is the graph that you can use when you want to make or you use presentation style in your answer writing. Then the unemployment rate has decreased from 5.6% to 3.2%. And again, this is seen mostly in the rural areas, which has seen a growth of 96%. And in the urban areas, it is seeing a growth of 43%. Next is about how women are creating jobs in terms of women-led entrepreneurship. So self-employment data has increased, or this number has increased to 30%, from 30% to 67.4%. And in terms of startups, close to 50% DPIIT registered startups have more than one women director, ensuring that they also have decision-making roles in the startups. Then they are also getting a lot of finance through the Mudra loans. At least they're getting around 68% of the Mudra loan, which is basically for the micro unit development initiative. And even at the street vendor level, they are getting 44% of the PM Swanidhi share. Then in MSMEs, women-led units are increasing from 1 crore to 1.92 crore. In fact, doubled. This number has doubled, and it has created more than 89 lakh plus jobs. So this can be given as one of the examples of women-led development. When you talk about the gender budget, it has grown substantially. In fact, it has grown 4 to 9% in the last decade. And this signifies shift from women's development to women-led development, because now women will be given a lot of empowerment and other initiatives so that she can take her own decisions and make informed decisions. Now, this is important, that what exactly we are supposed to, what is the future target? Our target is 70% female labor force or workforce participation, which is key for Viksit Bharat 2047. So in order for India to become a developed country, we require several initiatives all at once, and this initiative will have several multiplier effects. So we need to take this number to 70%. Now there are two concepts which we have discussed recently. It is about women development and women-led development. So women development, essentially, if I want to summarize it, or if I want to just write it in terms of its core meaning, so here women is seen more in a passive role, where women are looked as beneficiary, okay? So even though this is very progressive in nature, but still the task is not just women development, it is women-led development. And here women is seen as in active role, where it is a paradigm shift where women are not just seen as women, but as leaders, as decision makers and innovators in the process of development. So basically it ensures that they are involved in the decision-making process. So if you look at some of the questions which have come from this topic, this year itself in paper 2, there was a question, women's social capital complements in advancing empowerment and gender equity, explain. So you have to explain what is the idea of social capital and how does it further advances employment or empowerment and gender equity. Then there are similar terms like gender equality, gender equity, and women's empowerment. And the second part is about gender budgeting. Third question is about the role of gig economy in the process of empowerment of women in India. Okay. Going to the next topic. Tribal Ministry has sought separate census for the particularly vulnerable tribal groups from the Registrar General and the Census Commissioner of India. Okay, so this is the news. So we'll understand why this separate census is required and who are the PVTGs. But first, let's do the syllabus mapping. So it is part of GS paper 1, Indian society. So in Indian society, we talk about various social agents like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women, persons with disabilities. So within tribals, we also have a specific kind of tribals which are even more disadvantaged because of several disabilities. So these kind of tribals are known by a separate name called PVTGs. So we'll talk about them in slight detail as well. Then GS2 social justice in terms of the initiatives that are taken for their benefit. So here we'll talk about one specific initiative called PM Janman or Janman. So what initiatives have been taken for the upliftment of this vulnerable section? And further, we also need to know that their development will also lead to inclusive growth or inclusive development. So first, let's talk about why a separate census is required. So as we all know, that this time the government has mentioned that the census will be accompanied by caste census as well. So census essentially targets or it counts the number of people, not just the number of people, but also the disaggregated forms of their occupation, their deprivation, and other aspects. So this essentially will be very helpful for those section of the people who are underrepresented, so that we can count them effectively, and based on their deprivation, specific policies, specific initiatives can be initiated. Now, many PVTGs that are there in India do not distinctly counted in the 2011 census, even though in the census there is a scope of the ST census, but still they were not separately counted, and many of them were listed as part of STs, scheduled tribes, but if you can see that around 35 of them, 35 groups of PVTGs were not counted as STs. As a result, they were deprived of several benefits that the other STs get. So, and the others were merged under the larger ST groups. So again, this is one of the problems. The second one is that government has started with this policy of PM Janman, which is nothing but Janjati, Prime Minister Janjati, Adivasi, Nyay, Maha, Abhiyan or Andolan, I don't remember, Abhiyan maybe. Basically, so this is about giving justice to the PVTGs, right? So this includes a range of activities, including improvement in the education status, improvement in the nutrition status, improvement in the connectivity, right? Physical connectivity, digital connectivity, etc. So this essentially will be helpful in the overall development and growth of the PVTGs. But the problem is there is very little known about where exactly they are present, and we do not know to what extent what kind of funding is required in other aspects. So these detailing the census, separate census, will help plan and implement this scheme in a more suitable manner. Next, we'll talk about what exactly are PVTGs. So we can consider PVTGs as the most vulnerable tribal communities. In fact, their name is particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So their name in itself indicates that they are particularly vulnerable across various criteria, and these criteria is they involve in pre-agricultural technology such as subsistence farming, and they are not utilizing the modern technology like irrigation or say fertilizer, etc. So they have been doing the nomadic form of agriculture. Secondly, they are characterized by low literacy, so they cannot read or write. Third, they have economic backwardness. And fourth, the population is also declining and stagnating. So as of now, we do not exactly know the extent of their population, even though it is estimated to be around 45 lakh, but we do not know the trend in terms of whether it is increasing or decreasing, but generally it is considered to be decreasing or at the stagnant rate. What is the spread? So there are 75 PVTGs which have been identified, and they are across 18 states plus at the UT of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And they were recognized first by Dhebar Commission in 1960. So this name of the commission is important because it is associated with PVTGs. Okay. Next, since this news also involves Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India, so we need to know a couple of facts about it. The most important thing is that they were established in 1949 and they come under Ministry of Home Affairs, and they're responsible for all these activities such as population census under the Census Act of 1948, civil registration system within which your registration of birth and death are registered, and then sample registration system which talks about all the important socioeconomic data like birth rate, death rate, IMR, MMR, etc. And it also talks about the National Population Register, which was very much essential to pursue the citizenship rules 2003 framed under the Citizenship Act of 1948. And it also has this role of mother tongue survey to document the linguistic features of the selected mother tongues. Now, if you look at the previous year question, in fact, this year only UPSC has asked a question on the themes related to tribalism. For example, this question, does tribal development in India center around two axes, those of displacement and those of rehabilitation? Give your opinion. So you can talk about that yes, to a large extent this is true, but India has also started with overall development of the tribal groups in terms of providing schemes like Eklavya scheme for residential education. You can talk about the PM Janman scheme for the PVTGs. So you can talk about that. Apart from these initiatives, we are also undertaking the holistic development of the tribal groups as well. Next news is about Trump's Intel deal and the reinvention of US state capitalism. Again, a very important topic to understand the nature of or intersection of polity and economy. So at the onset, it is part of GS2 IR, but it can also be asked as part of nature of economy or in paper 3, and it can also be asked as part of GS paper 1, because in GS paper 1, we have all these philosophies like capitalism, socialism, etc. So if you look at the news, what really happened recently is that the US government acquired a 10% stake in Intel. Now you know that Intel is essentially a semiconductor manufacturing company. Essentially it manufactures chips which are required in computers, right? But it is seeing a lot of decline because of competition and because of players like NVIDIA and the companies in Taiwan. So because of that, it is seeing a lot of decline in its market capital, and therefore US wants to acquire this so that some of the jobs or some of the strategic initiative such as CHIPS Act. So US has initiated with this act, CHIPS Act, to ensure that it has abundant supply of the semiconductor material with it, and it can use it as a strategic tool as well. So what happens here, as US has acquired a 10% stake, it has essentially made a notable shift in the traditional free market capitalist model, and it is moving more towards the state-led capitalism. So in this article, we'll talk about the concept of capitalism in brief and what are the different formats like free market capitalism versus the state-led capitalism. How are they different and in what ways are they similar? So what exactly happens in state-led capitalism? So first of all, we need to understand what exactly is capitalism. Capitalism essentially is the idea that the market understands how to produce and distribute goods. It needs to be done on the basis of merit or on the basis of demand. Okay? So market produces goods which are in demands, and it supplies on the basis of the purchasing power of the people. Here, initially there was no role of the state, but as several important or several financial crises started to emerge, including the Great Depression of 1929 and the 2008 financial crisis, state started to actively intervene in market. So initially in the Western societies, state started to act as a regulator, and then it started also to start taking control of some important and strategic sectors. So basically what exactly state-led capitalism is, it is an economic system with a strong government control over economy. So we can also keep this, or we can use the example of China. So China uses state-led capitalism where, to a large extent, state has a say in the financial decisions made by major economic players. For example, recently China put certain restrictions on the supply of critical and rare earth minerals because that was as a response for the US secondary sanction. So it wanted to show this, that China can also play a substantial role as far as the supply chain of important resources are concerned, thereby showing its political might as well. So in state-led capitalism, the ownership of key industries plus the strategic resource allocation is undertaken by the government or the state. So we'll discuss that in more detail. And the nature is that overall it is a market-based framework, but state or the government will have substantial ownership of important industries, maybe defense, aviation, nuclear safety, nuclear energy, etc., etc. Okay. If you look at the brief history of how it happened, so in the 1960s, Europe, France and UK intervened in various sectors like computers and aerospace, primarily because of the competition that US was creating in those areas. And they wanted to ensure that these sectors have some sort of advantage because of sustained government intervention or government effort. Now, why this was important? Because they were extremely resource intensive. And capitalism generally requires profit or it has the profit motive at the short term and the long term initiative or the long term measures. But because of the fact that these sectors require a long term and sustained research and development, many of the entrepreneurs were not willing to enter into the space as far as Europe was concerned. Therefore, Britain and France initiated or intervened in these sectors. But at the end of the day, it did not work effectively, and ultimately they led to the privatization of these sectors, especially during the Margaret Thatcher era. This concept was very much famous, TINA. Now tell me what you understand by this concept, TINA, okay? Fine. In India also, this approach of state-led capitalism started way after the independence, or just after the independence. It was inspired by the USSR model. And the purpose was for rapid industrialization as part of the Mahalanobis model. So basically what was the objective was that industrialization can be created by the state by providing specific incentives, okay, and by investment. Because at that point of time, India was not willing and also not, or India did not want excess foreign capital from the external agents because it may had some sort of influence in its decision making. Also, the homegrown industrialists were also not that financially secure that they would be providing this much investment. Secondly, it would also maintain. So this first reason was basically about economic reason. Second reason was about the strategic or political reason that the state wanted to maintain control over strategic sectors like defense, like atomic energy, like other sectors, important sectors. Thirdly, there was a social component as well to promote balanced regional development, right? For example, there were certain states in India which were mineral rich, like Jharkhand or Bihar, right? So government promoted that kind of development which did not, or which ensured that just because a certain sector has or a certain industry is nearer to a region or nearer to a mining region, it will not give it undue advantage. So because of that reason, it started with several policies that would ensure balanced regional development. So these were the initiative, or these were the drivers for the state-led capitalism in India. So essentially why I have put up these two things is because it provides a comparison of how state-led capitalism started in the European countries and in India. Now, if we look at the pros and cons, what exactly are the benefits? So benefit is that it ensures strategic control over critical industries, example, your atomic energy. It promotes long-term investment because many times it may happen that the investment will not give you immediate profit, so the private sector will not be interested in making investment here. Thirdly, it safeguards national security and it can also provide employment, it provide regional or balanced regional development. But at the same time, there are certain cons as well. And the first cons is that it leads to risk of inefficiency, corruption, and political interference. For example, losses in Air India. Secondly, it can crowd out private sector, competition, and innovation. Also the resources as well. Third, it will also put a lot of fiscal burden on the taxpayers. So again, free market capitalism started to emerge as the alternative, and especially post 1990s, free market capitalism started to make a headwind again. And here, some of the pros here were that it encourages competition, innovation, and efficiency. Secondly, it attracts global investment and fosters entrepreneurship. If you look at some of the cons or some of the disadvantage, it leads to market failures in essential sectors like health, environment, infrastructure. So these are some of the undesirable aspects or of unbridled capitalism. Secondly, it can widen inequality as well. The rich will go richer and the poor will grow poorer. In fact, in India, this was characterized as jobless growth. Why it was jobless growth? Because most of the growth or most of the employment that was generated post 1990 reforms were majorly in the service sector and not in the manufacturing sector. And the problem with the growth in service sector was that it was resource intensive and it required people to have a lot of skills. But in manufacturing sector, with less skill also, you could have got employment as well. So in India, the 1991 reforms led to jobless growth. So essentially, it led to widening of inequality, and it also led to neglect of strategic needs. That is why we need some sort of arrangement where the best aspects of market capitalism and state-led capitalism can take place. If you look at the previous year question, UPSC had asked a philosophical question on this topic in terms of capitalism has guided the world economy to unprecedented prosperity. However, it often encourages short-sightedness and contributes to wide disparities between the rich and the poor. In this light, would it be correct to believe and adopt capitalism driving inclusive growth in India? Discuss. A very important and thought-provoking question in terms of how capitalism can lead to inclusive growth. So capitalism can promote job, right? Provided it is done for some of the important sectors like food processing sector, manufacturing sector, which are employment intensive, right? And it also should ensure that the sectors like healthcare, education are also not neglected. So a combination of both approaches are required. Next news is about Gram Sabha holds authority to prepare CFR management plans, say center. So basically the Ministry of Tribal Affairs have resolved a long-standing debate between the Forest Department on one hand and the Gram Sabha on the other hand with respect to the CFR, which is Community Forest Reserve rights, okay, CFR rights. So again, how it should be maintained. And obviously it is part of GS paper 2 polity because Gram Sabha is associated or Forest Rights Act is associated, and it is also part of environment. So if you look at the important or the clarification provided by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, so this was triggered by an event in Chhattisgarh. So Chhattisgarh Forest Department basically claimed that they had the right for providing or for interpreting the community forest resource, right? So when it comes to community forest resource, it needs, or there is the decision of how the particular area is to be developed and how these resources are to be utilized. Now, the question comes whether it should be done on the decision of the bureaucrats like the forest department, because they claim that they have the right information, they have the data, they have the skills to understand and make the best use of all the resources. On the other hand, there are people who have been living in these forest areas for centuries, and they also have claimed that it is their interest that should be prevailing over all such consideration, because they have been living in this environment along with the nature, and they know the benefits and advantages of taking certain decisions. So in this situation, or in this contradiction, the tribal ministry has clarified the stand that the role of union and state department is not to supersede the Gram Sabha, but to support it. And the Gram Sabha, via the CFR committees, which is the Community Forest Rights Resources Committees, have the sole power to make CFR management plans, so how the community forest resources are to be utilized. The underlying power will be with the Gram Sabha. Now, if you look at what exactly is the mandate of FRA, which is the Forest Rights Act, which was passed in 2006, there are a couple of things that you need to know. First, the mandate was to correct historical injustices. So the forest dwellers which were residing in the forest for centuries, they were deprived their right of living in those areas, and they were seen as encroachers by the forest legislation passed by the Britishers, and even to a large extent by the Indian governments as well. But this historic injustice was said to be overcome by this Forest Rights Act of 2006. Secondly, it wanted, or it sought to secure livelihood and food needs of the forest dwelling communities by providing them with the CFR right, or not just the individual right, but also the community rights as well. So what exactly is the management plan within the community forest resource, or CFR? So first, the objective is equity and inclusion. So it involves women and tribal youth in decision making and livelihood. So it aligns with the FRA's vision of environmental justice. So it is inclusive and it involves equity. It is context specific, which means that it is not merely for the economic development. It is for local ecological. It also takes into account the cultural and the socio-economic sensitivities of that region as well. Thirdly, it is driven by a community-led model which empowers the Gram Sabha as the stewards or as the drivers of forest and livelihood programs. So instead of a top-down approach, it adopts a bottom-up approach. Fourthly, to support all these functions, the union government has launched a particular initiative called Dharti Aba Janjatiya Gram Utkarsh Abhiyan in 2023. Essentially, this was meant for the state's government to impanel certain NGOs that will assist the Gram Sabha in the preparation of CFR MP, which is the CFR management plan. The idea was that the NGOs will help them in terms of skill development, in terms of understanding how to properly utilize the resources, and providing them all the assistance that is required for them to make some authoritative decisions. Next, if you look at the question which came in the past from this topic, under the Scheduled Tribes and the Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006, who shall be the authority to initiate the process for determining the nature and extent of individual or community forest rights, or both? 2013. You tell me what would be the right answer in the comments. Next topic is about commercial prohibited speeches not part of fundamental rights. Supreme Court has recently given this verdict in light of the recent controversy about the influencers. And this is basically part of GS paper 2 polity. So there are two things which we should be aware of, that free speech is part of Article 19(1)(a). All of us know this. But we also know that it is not an absolute right, but it has reasonable restriction. And this is written explicitly in Article 19, Clause 2, in terms of prohibition, all these speeches which are against the sovereignty, unity of the country. It promotes some sort of against the friendly relation of the country. So there are certain uh, restrictions which are provided under Article 19, Clause 2, which goes against the rights provided under Article 19(1)(a). So basically, there are certain reasonable restriction. Now, the first point is that what constitute as reasonable will be determined by the Supreme Court. Okay, it is not to be decided by the government, but to be decided by the judiciary or the apex court. Second, in this case, Supreme Court has added two more dimensions as part of Article 19, Clause 2, which is prohibited speech and commercial speech, which will be considered as exception to Article 19(1)(a). Now, what is prohibited speech? We can consider prohibited speech as a form of hate speech, or speech which incites violence, or which go or defame someone. So it can be hate speech, or it can be defamatory speech, which goes against the right to reputation of somebody. And commercial speech could be something that leads to generation of money, or in the form of ad, or in the form of a content that is to be viewed by paid viewers only. So these, under these commercial or the prohibited speeches, will not have the protection provided under Article 19(1)(a), as this is what the Supreme Court has said. And it was said in the context of the following, that some of the social influencers, or these influencers, had made derogatory remarks against persons with disabilities, which was not taken in good light with the Supreme Court. So these influencers already have apologized to the Supreme Court in the court, but the Supreme Court has also insisted that they also render their apologies on their platform as well, okay, so that it is publicly visible. So what is essentially, why it is being done? Because the influencer accountability is important because of their large following. And since they have large following, it influences a large section of the society. Now the problem with this is that the influencers essentially they generally use algorithmic biases to provide for more engagements. And as if you look at the Google Trends or any algorithm, if you analyze these algorithm, those opinions get more traction which are polarizing in nature, which are offensive in nature, which are derogatory in nature. And because of such algorithmic biases, these influencers generally resort to such comments or those views which generally is very much offensive to the general senses, and therefore they tend to extract as much viewership as possible. Now this is something that the Supreme Court has mentioned, that it is against the basic tenet of decency, and it they should definitely be acting more responsibly. But the Supreme Court has also provided some caution as well, that the punishment should not be disproportionate. In fact, it should be proportionate, and there should be some sort of compensation under the IT rules and Cinematograph Act. Now, the concept of proportionate punishment, basically it blends some sort of the ideas of freedom of speech and expression on one hand, plus the limitations on one hand. And this doctrine of proportionality was was promulgated also in the Anuradha Bhasan case of 2020. And the court also directed the government to frame comprehensive social media guidelines to guide the conduct of those who are using social media. Okay. If you look at the similar judgment related to free speech, we have two major judgments here, apart from the Anuradha Bhasan case of 2020, where the Supreme Court talked about the proportionality, the limitation or the limitation in terms of what the response that the government should take. The first one is about Amish Devgan versus Union of India case of 2020. So in this particular case, Amish Devgan was a TV host, and he made a derogatory remark about one of the Sufi leaders. And this basically was considered as a violation of freedom of speech and expression, and considered as part of hate speech. So in this case, Supreme Court mentioned that it will not protect any hate speech under the garb or under the guise of freedom of speech and expression. So it basically put some sort of limitation within Article 19(1)(a), emphasized the responsibility of influencers with wide range. On the other hand, in the Shreya Singhal case, the IT Act, especially the section 66A of the IT Act, was under question. And in this case, the Supreme Court held that the section 66A of IT Act was very prone to misuse because of the use of the wordings like it was very generic in nature, so it could be implied or it could be used in multiple cases without any specific guidelines. So this was assumed to be having a chilling impact or chilling effect on the freedom of speech and expression. Because of that reason, Supreme Court did not abrogated this particular provision because it violated Article 19(1)(a). So on one hand, Supreme Court has defended the freedom of speech and expression against genuine government intervention, but on the other hand, the Supreme Court has also put limitation, as we can see in the Amish Devgan case. So in this particular case, in this particular news, we can see a balance of both these perspectives. Further, we have other framework as well. If you look at the legal framework, so IT Act 2000 and its amendment, it regulate online content, and specifically there is section 69A, which empowers the government to block access to information. And also we have Cinematograph Act 1952, and it also empowers the Film Certification Board, Central Board of Film Certification, to classify films on different criteria or based on the content of the film. And it criticizes maligns, prohibits content that criticizes, maligns, or slanders a person or group. If you look at a previous year question from this topic, we have seen, like, this is the question: what do you understand by the concept freedom of speech and expression? A direct question. Does it cover hate speech also? Of course not, it does not cover. We can give the example of Amish Devgan case here. And why do the films in India stand on a different, slightly different plane from other forms of expression? Now here, if you look at the films, the press, they do not require any sort of regulation before they get published. Only after they have been published, it can be kept into regulation. But films, they require certification from a specific regulatory board. Why? Because movies tend to have a large impact on the mind or the psyche of the people. So the same logic can be also applied in this case, because in this day and age, social media and internet has gained a lot of traction among the youth. Now we'll come to the places in news. And today we have Fiji Islands as part of places in news. And this was in news because India and Fiji have announced new measures to strengthen defense and maritime security cooperation. PM, or the leader of Fiji, was in India, and India and Fiji share a lot of strategic and defense relations and economic relations. So PM Modi went to Fiji in 2014, and it started with this initiative, FIPIC, Forum for Pacific Island Countries Cooperation, right? And also we had the vision of Indo-Pacific, that was rule-based order in Indo-Pacific. So there are multiplicity of interest as far as India and Fiji is concerned. India's diaspora is also very much prevalent here, which is known as Girmityas. So India and Fiji share a very robust people-to-people ties. Also, Fiji is a small Pacific island country, so it also has or faces a lot of threat from the uh, climate change impact, right? So for that matter, India has substantially helped Fiji to manage those things. And if you look at the political features of Fiji, it is located in South Pacific Ocean, and it comprises around 330 islands and 500 small islet and reefs. If you look at the geographical feature, it has this island, Viti Liu and Vanua Liu are the major islands. Topography, they are volcanic in nature, and Mount Tomani V is the highest peak. If you look at Coral Island, smaller islands are coral and surrounded by reefs. Now we'll move to the quick updates. The first news is about guidelines or standard operating principles for animal blood transfer and blood banks. This guideline is given by the Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying, DAHD. And this is important because if you look at the contribution played by the animal husbandry or the animals in India in general to the GDP, it is about 5.5%. So it is very important that the safety and security of the animals are taken into account, right? So this decision is about providing a national framework for safe, ethical, and scientifically sound blood transfusion practice. Blood transfusion practice essentially is a life-saving intervention for the animals which require blood transfusion. So again, it is about understanding that it should not be done in a haphazard manner. It should be done with a scientific manner. And what are the key highlights? It establishes national guidelines for donor selection, blood collection, storage, and transfusion protocols. So it is again in a scientific manner. Secondly, it integrates One Health principle to reduce zoonotic risk. Okay, so it is also, we need to look at it in the perspective that the harm of animal health also impacts human health. So this is the primary funda or primary concept of One Health principle. Thirdly, it lays the foundation of National Veterinary Blood Bank Network as well. And fourth, it supports education, veterinary education, training, and research. Next, World Food Programme. The Government of India and World Food Programme has recently announced collaboration aimed at addressing the global hunger crisis, within which India would be supplying the fortified rice to the regions which are under stress. In fact, you may be aware that recently Gaza is facing a humanitarian or man-made famine, right? It is facing famine of a larger scale, right? So India is going to supply fortified rice to areas which are facing hunger, right? And this is essentially aligned with the concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, or the world is India, or world is family. Okay, so this is basically to ensure that development should not be confined to the national boundaries, but it should be universal in nature, because no nation is an island, right? About UNFP, or United Nations World Food Programme, it is the world's largest humanitarian organization dedicated to saving lives in the emergencies and using food assistance to build pathways toward peace, stability, and prosperity. Secondly, it supports people recovering from conflicts, disasters, and the impacts of climate change. Third, it operates in more than 120 countries, including in India. And also, because of this seminal role that it has played over a several time, it has been given, or it has been awarded, the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. Next, the news is on Tavi River. India has warned Pakistan about a potential flood in River Tavi as a humanitarian gesture. Now, this becomes important because we know that post-Pahalgaon terror attack, India has suspended or put the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, which means that first, India will no longer share the water which was mandated under the IWT. Secondly, India will also not share the water-related information to Pakistan periodically. So within this, India has not gone by the IWT mechanism, but in fact, India has chosen a diplomatic way to convey the flood warnings to Pakistan. So this is the change in orientation, and this indicates that India remains very firm on terrorism. At the same time, India understands that humanitarian consideration should also be given due priority. If you look at the Tavi River, it originates from Kailash Kund Glacier near Kali Kund and near this Doda district. It is a tributary of Chenab River, in fact a left bank tributary. It is considered as the lifeline of Jammu city. Next, the news is about snow leopard. A study in Jammu and Kashmir reveals that common leopards are encroaching on the snow leopard habitat, possibly due to climate change. So in this particular region, earlier there were snow leopards found, but now a recent study was done using camera traps and all. It showed that the common leopards are also seen there, possibly because of climate change, because the habitation that they require is now supported by the upper regions. Right? So if you look at the snow leopard, they are commonly found in Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. If you look at the features, it is smoky gray fur with dark rosettes. It likes solitary confinement, active at dawn and dusk. And one important animal behavior characteristic that it has is that unlike the other big cats like tigers and lions, it cannot roar. Snow leopard is also the state animal of Himachal Pradesh and Ladakh. If you look at the conservation status, IUCN Red List, it is vulnerable. CITES, it is Appendix 1. And if you look at India, it is part of Schedule 1 and 4 of Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Next, rare earth magnet. So we have already discussed the concept of state capitalism or state-led capitalism. So within this, what happened was, because of these sanctions imposed by United States or under the Trump administration, China also started with withholding the rare earth elements, which are very much crucial for a variety of sectors in the manufacturing sector, in the cutting-edge manufacturing sector, including the EV or electric vehicle sector and the rest of the automobile sector, within which the rare earth magnet is one of the most crucial component in the automotive or in the automobile sector. And what China did was made the process very cumbersome, and therefore there is a delay or there is some sort of a decline in the supply of the rare earth magnet all across the world. And as a result of that, the automakers, which means that car makers or the bike manufacturers like Royal Enfield, are cutting features and seeking alternative due to shortage of rare earth magnets. Now, if you look at what exactly are rare earth magnets, they are type of permanent magnets made from alloys of rare earth elements. And these rare earth elements are a set of 17 elements. Properties, if you look at their rare earth magnets, they are highly dense, high conductivity, exceptional magnetic strength, and high energy density. And more importantly, they are also very compact. So apart from all these things, they are also compact, they are powerful, used in electronics, clean energy, healthcare, and automotive industries. Types of magnet, mainly of two types, neodymium and samarium cobalt. These are the types of magnets. Next, immunoglobulin M antibody. This news is about a research recently conducted in Netaji Subhas College of Kolkata, and it gave a very significant report in terms of functioning of the antibody and antigen. So what exactly happens is, whenever any pathogen enters our body, pathogen can be your bacteria or virus, etc. So these are the external elements that enter into body. These are called antigens. In response to antigen, antibodies are activated. which basically targets these antigens. So think of antigens as missiles entering into the territory of a country, right? And think of antibodies as the defense system of a country. So this gets activated because of the immune system of the country. So the antibodies, they target the antigens and they try to destroy the antigens from destroying the body as such. So what happens is that they are targeted in nature and they locks with the antigen and they render it ineffective. But the problem with this is that antigens keep changing its shape and its properties once they enter the body. So as a result of that, it becomes very difficult for the antibodies to target the changing nature of the antigens. Now this property recently, it showed that the IgM antibody, which is a specific form of antibody, can also act as a mechanical stabilizer. So earlier, it was used as, or it was acted as a chemical stabilizer. But now the research conducted at the college or university in center in Kolkata has revealed that it can also act as a mechanical stabilizer as well, in terms of locking it in a bind or in a way that it will not change its shape and its properties. So in a way, it has shown that the antigens can be locked if suitable amount of antibodies are provided. That was the nature of research. So if you look at this particular antibody, IgM antibody, it is the largest and first antibody immune system makes when fighting off the antigens like viruses, bacteria, parasites, or any harmful invaders. So it's also the first antibody the immune system starts to develop as a fetus. They are found in blood and lymph. Okay, so this is the properties of antibody. So this research that was conducted has a far-reaching consequence in terms of development and in terms of healthcare research and development, right? So this concludes today's news today. And now you will be seeing a lot of questions on your screen. So make sure that you attempt these questions and also try to incorporate some of the questions from the mains 2025 as well, as far as current affairs is concerned. Because if you look at the mains exam this year, 70% of the questions had their reflections from the various resources provided by Vision IS, right? So make sure that you pay adequate attention to the current affairs resources and also use them for solving questions, previous year questions. With that, thank you so much and all the best.